for sure.
The ventricles of the heart, or what are the 4 quadrants of the heart called? Are they called ventricles? I didn't know I was such a good cardiologist.
You may be right.
I mean, even a broken clock is right twice a day.
That's right. Even a blind hog can find an acorn once in a while. A nod as good as a wink to a blind mute. Come on, we can just keep going.
A rolling stone gathers no moss. So Pastor was talking about Tutankhamun. It's just like, it's a triple name. There's like 3 names.
Tutankhamun.
Amun, that's right. And he's got the 2.
He's got the,
Northern
that's
and Southern Egypt, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. That's supposed to be like a falcon, but it looks just like a buzzard. And of course, the cobra.
Now, this was taken from his tomb, right?
That was on his face. That was his burial mask.
I cannot believe how bright and shiny this thing. I mean, obviously they've cleaned it up.
It is all I don't think they had to. Gold doesn't.
Yeah, that's true. It doesn't lose its luster.
No, but the sarcophagi. He was in, I forget how many different sarcophagi, and the last one that he was in pure gold. These people waste that.
Gold.
Yeah, it was, and it had a lot of the, these stones embedded in it. His chariot was of gold. His throne was of gold. His chariot's over there in Atlanta right now. His throne chair is still in Cairo. This is in Cairo.
Now, when they do those tours and they take all of the archaeological artifacts around, is it the real stuff?
Yeah. They found, it took Howard Carter 3 years from the time he found the tomb to when they brought the rest of the stuff out of the tomb, because it all had to be cataloged, and
Well, and
then they brought it, and they found something like around 5,000 pieces in his tomb. So there's a lot, daggers, swords, throne chairs.
There's that story about how, like, one guy got excited and he went to pick up a necklace and it just disintegrated in his hand and all these beads went everywhere.
Yeah.
That's like Indiana Jones level stuff. It just makes it's so interesting. Like, he searched for that tomb for how many years? I mean, 20 years? I mean, it was like
it was a long time. Everybody was searching for it because they finally they came across his name. They didn't know anything about him. He died so young, and he ruled for just 9 years, and he was buried under
something. It was in the Valley of the Kings, I
thought. It was in the Valley. In fact, I went into his tomb, and his mummy is in there.
Oh, they left it in? Or they took it back?
Debbie got a great picture of that. Several folks did on the trip. His mummy is in there. They put it back in there. Used to be in the Cairo Museum, but they put it back into the tomb, and you can go in. Of course, all you can see is just his head,
the rest
and
is
then you can see at the bottom his feet and his toes sticking out. His toes must be that long.
It's amazing.
It's just really freaky looking.
It's so strange. Well, it's because all the skin shrinks and it's like basically bones, that sort of thing. You look at this, you look at the opulence, just the solid gold sarcophagus, and then you think about all that has to happen in history for that to be completely forgotten, to the point where people are trying to find it. Whereas before, like, everybody knew, well, that's where they bury the kings. This is very important stuff.
They were in the Valley of the Kings. In fact, when Howard Carter went into the Valley of the Kings back in the early 1900s, I think. I'm reading a book on that right now by Patterson and
Schultz.
No, Patterson and Duggard.
Okay.
Patterson and James Patterson and Duggard. And they've got it in a story form, which I don't like, but I'm having they are accurate with what they do. He goes in there and they tell him, this is done. We've discovered every tomb that's out here. Well, they find a few other things of other people, but they know eventually that Tut was a pharaoh and that he is buried somewhere in there. Now, the story goes it's under another Pharaoh's tomb that it got up under, and that a guy was in there and spilled a bottle of water or a bucket of water, and the water all started pouring down into, and they knew that there was an opening there.
Wow.
So they knew that something was below there. So they run and get Howard Carter, bring him back, and they start, and they find the steps down, and then the door. But
I mean,
the amazing thing to me is this guy was one of the poorest pharaohs.
Yeah.
And,
Right, in
and yet it
comparison.
takes 3 years to document, 3 years to document all of this stuff, and then they start to move it out. They document it, they number it, they, you know.
Well, I suppose that the more rich pharaohs, like that's the stuff that's still visible. You know,
Yeah.
you talked about that one.
Seti the first, but when they got to his tomb, it's empty.
Yeah,
It's been looted.
Yeah, so it just so happened that this one was hidden well enough, or time had
Yeah,
hidden it.
and people had forgotten about him.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this is one of the poorest pharaohs, and yet the wealth for us is just
Nefertiti
unimaginable.
raised him as her own son. Her husband, and I forget his dad's name, I forget which pharaoh he was, but Nefertiti raised him as her own son because his dad she could never give him a son. She could, the children, but she was the main queen. And that's how you became the main queen, was that you gave him. Well, they really did love each other, but he took another maid and had Tutankhamun.
And then the
by her.
queen raised him.
The mother died, was assassinated, killed,
yeah.
and Nefertiti took him and raised him as her own.
Very similar to some Bible stories that we might remember.
Yeah, that's right.
The royal line of succession is so very interesting, and it still fascinates us even today. You know, all the stuff with Kate Middleton that's going on in the news right now. I suppose you saw all that.
Yeah, you know, and I'm somewhat of an Anglophile. I
somewhat?
love British history. I love that. I don't want a king or a queen, you know. I love my country, but I do admire and love their history. And I feel my heart just so goes out to them right now.
Yeah.
It really does.
Same here. Yeah, that was a tough day for all the people that had made all those
And
conspiracy theories.
why would anybody sit around and do that kind of stuff? Other than it sells newspapers, I guess.
Well, or whatever it sells. I don't know if people are actually buying newspapers anymore. Do you get any newspapers? Do you have any
No, I
delivered to your
look at
house
them
or-
online.
Yeah.
You know, I do that in the mornings. I got up this morning. One of the first things I did was sat down with a cup of coffee and started looking at the Daily Mail.
Daily Mail,
British
yeah, it's a good
newspaper.
one.
Jerusalem Post, you know, things like that.
I get in there. I try to do. You know, I heard you say a couple of years ago how you try to just look at
The
the
headlines.
So I do that once in a while, and you know, I usually end up rolling my eyes regardless of the news source. But
Go down through the news, you know, on Yahoo, which is so slanted, it's pathetic. But
well, the conservative outlets a lot of times are similarly slanted. That's
Yeah.
why you've got to you've really got to look and
yeah,
try
I
to
look
get
at
more of a
I
broad
look
view.
at a number of things.
It's interesting. We always talk about how news is slanted, but you've read so much history. I'm sure you've seen how even as people tell stories of all this, it's slanted one way or the other.
Yeah, and that was a good. That's a good way to say there are 20,000 Egyptian gods in Egypt.
Wow.
20,000.
Wow.
11 are Christian.
Did y'all have a Christian guy when
The
you
number
were there?
one Christian
Oh,
god.
wow.
You know, and I can't think of, this is a good thing, the guy, the older Egyptologist who is always at the opening of these tombs and these sarcophagi, Hawasi, or I can't think of, I don't know how to pronounce it. You see him on National Geographic all the time. You see him on the news from time to time because he's the one that they call in to do. Well, Sahih Hawass. Yes. He was our God's professor, teacher.
Okay, teacher.
So our God teaches in the University of Cairo and all. Very committed Christian. Solid. Man, he preached a sermon next to the last day on our bus that I'm telling you was truth. I thought if he gave an invitation, we'd all walk down the aisle of the bus.
Walk the sands down
But the
aisle.
interesting thing was this, is that he reads back into Egyptian history a lot of Bible. A lot of Bible.
In a good way, I take it?
Well, he loves his country, you know,
Oh,
which
I
I'm
see.
glad for that. There's nothing wrong with a Christian loving their country. They should. Country's not perfect. I love America. America's far from perfect. But it's in the mindset and how they were trained and how they grew up, and they read back. He's Coptic, and he reads back into Egyptian history a lot. And I'll give you an example. I don't have it on here, but on one of these statues that is in the Cairo Museum, there is a raven that is behind the head of Pharaoh, and his wings come around and cradle his head like that. He reads back into that the Holy Spirit has come now on the Pharaoh and is watching over him. Now, it's a falcon, which is a dirty bird. It's an unclean bird.
Yes.
I don't think that the Holy Spirit would ever be portrayed as an unclean bird, nor do I think he would come in a light on a pagan king. So that kind of way.
Yeah.
But my dad always taught me to eat the fish, spit out the bones.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah.
So what's the genesis of one of these trips? I mean, I know that you plan them out like years in advance. I mean, like, when did you start doing this? Because you're kind of the guide, right?
I started doing it. I went on my first trip with my pastor and my folks' pastor, Ryan Eklund, back in 1978
Oh, wow. Long time ago.
or 79, somewhere in there. I think maybe it was 79, which was the year I got married. So we went on our first one, and the very next year, I put together a small group of people and tagged along with him on the next year's trip and took my mom and my wife with me. So I started back then, and I've been doing these. I've been to Israel probably 25 times. I've been to Egypt about 4 or 5 times.
At what point did you become the leader
Then
for
to
the whole
Greece.
thing? Because you're tagging along, you kind of got apprentice, and then you're like, this is just a passion. This is something I want to do to share. Because I
It
assume
just
that's
kind of
why-
started slowly. I don't know.
Because it's really about sharing the Holy Land with other people, giving them an opportunity.
Listen, I've been there. I've seen it. You know, I still love going back there.
Sure.
In fact, Deb and I have talked about one day going and staying there about 3 months and working at Gordon's Calvary, which I've seen retired pastors do. But that's a long ways off.
Yeah. That would be really cool, though.
What I like is I like to take you
Yeah.
and see the expression on your face when I point out something and say, now let me explain something about this to you.
Well,
And
yeah.
it just is like the reality of it and the scripture just kind of go together.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about. That's why I put some of these pictures on here.
Yes, this was Moses. No.
Yeah. That would be a really interesting podcast episode.
Moses.
It's just pastors saying the most erroneous things possible. As you can see, this is Val Kilmer's ancient ancestor. You can tell by the length of the beard.
Yeah.
Right.
This is supposed to be wisdom. You know, he's got all this wisdom.
Well, and that's interesting to me. They highlight the beard, they highlight the eyebrows, even though you say they shave all the hair off of their bodies. You know, that was
do.
like
They
part of
do.
their culture.
Being
I thought
clean.
That was interesting.
That was cleanliness. Which in all of that, which was interesting to me, in all of the plagues that God brings on Egypt, it all just messes with their gods. Like the frogs.
Right.
You know, you want to worship the frog? I'm going to unleash them all over. You'll be sick of them.
When we went and saw, I guess it was just called Moses at the Sight and Sound Theater. I've talked to you about this before. With each one of the plagues that would come, they had this, I think it was a special video projection, but they had a monument to that god, and as the plague would come, the monument would crumble and fall into a million pieces.
neat.
So it was this illustration of God dismantling Egypt. Which I know. I was thinking about tweeting about this. I don't tweet very much. But it seems like we could come up with some kind of funny eschatological thing about this year, because we've got another one of those crazy eclipses. So you say God's, here's one of the plagues, darkness. And then we've also got, did you see this? It's the 2 locust things. Did you see this, Joanna? The 2 crops of locusts. It's like the 17-year locust and the 13-year locust. I'm getting the years wrong, but either way, it's the first time in 225 years that both of them are coming out in the same year. So we get the plague of locusts, the plague of darkness. What next? What next? So anyway, Pastor's next sermon's going to be all about how the world is coming to an end.
Yeah. I'll give you the date.
Maxtradamus
this
is
year.
what we're going to call it.
I'll give you the date this year.
Here's the thing. So I wanted to look at 2 more of these pictures. You showed these in your message. These aren't like new.
Yeah.
But this one was funny for 2 reasons. Well, not funny. It was interesting for 2 reasons. One of the ones was you talked about how you got scared in there and you had Debbie protecting you, which made me laugh really hard. But you said that they just, tell me about this. They just left y'all in there and they turned all the lights off?
They did.
So there weren't any doors or anything that people would just walk in and out of this
You had
place?
to walk. You don't see behind this obelisk here that there's the door. There's the entrance to it. Let me. Yes, we got in there.
Okay.
There's so many things I could tell you. This is Luxor, the temple at Luxor, and it was built by the Greeks during the Greek period. What you see here, you see how you'll see this on all of these temples, how there's this slant coming in ahead the door, and there would be a stone that would be across this up here,
okay.
and then you would go under. And the size of it was basically saying, look, our God is so big, we have to make the doors this big for our gods to get in. Now, think about that. This was called the head of the gate. Lift up your heads, O ye gates.
Oh, interesting.
And be lifted up, ye everlasting doors, that the King of glory may come in. David comes and says, you'd have to take the head of the gate off for our God. You want to talk about big, that may be big enough to let your God in, but you have to take the gate. The other thing is this. This was where the sun would come up.
Right.
And this, it would shine through here. So this became the pathway of the sun through here. Now, for all of their temples, that was the huge thing that Pharaoh was doing. If you listen to the sermon from yesterday, he would go in to wake up his God, go through the ritual so that the sun would come up every morning.
Right.
That's the issue of darkness. Your number one God,
Ra,
has been darkened. He didn't come up. Did your Pharaoh do his job right? Or has a greater God just shut down your great God? You just don't get that everywhere.
Glory. That's what something else I wanted to talk to you about. You didn't amen yourself yesterday. You gloried yourself twice.
Glory. No, I didn't glory myself.
I knew you'd hate
Glory.
that. Well, so you stepped to the side. Okay,
Glory.
There's a fascinating sociological component to this that I don't even know if I can put into words.
Okay.
But they have this belief that the Pharaoh going in and preparing the God causes the sun to then rise perfectly in this temple.
Yeah.
So the belief comes first, but that's before they even have the temple. So then what's making the sun come up before they build the temple?
Well, you know that pagan religions don't make any sense. I've wondered the same cotton-picking thing. Well, it was coming up before this thing was ever here.
Well, that's several of those passages in Isaiah. You know, the woodcutter cuts down the wood, and with half of it he burns it, and half of it he fashions for himself a god, and then he bows to the god. So it really, it doesn't make sense.
And then, of course, the other part of that was causing the Nile to flood, the Nile to flood. Because all that water would bring in fresh silt, and it would bring in water. And I am telling you, on either side of the Nile, it's just as lush and green, and they grow beautiful tomatoes and potatoes, and leek and garlic, but wheat. And in Rome's day, when Rome ruled the world and Egypt became a colony of Rome, that was the breadbasket for Rome. Rome got all of their wheat out of Egypt.
And yeah, so then turning the Nile to blood, it just completely adulterates all the crops, everything's
Well,
lost.
that was their god too. That was one of their gods too. Now you remember the magicians came out and repeated a couple of these things.
Right.
And then they get to one, and I can't remember if it's the gnats or the fly, which one it is, but they come back to Pharaoh and they say, okay, this is the finger of God.
Yeah, we can't do
It's the
anything.
finger of God. We can't do this.
Something that's beyond us.
In my personal belief, being here in all of that, looking at that, and I've been there. I was in '79. I was there right after Jimmy Carter and Anwar Sadat met. I was in Egypt and rode camels. In that day and time, you'd hop a camel and you'd ride up to the pyramids. There was no commercial, people were there, but it was not good night. They've got platforms and bathrooms and, welcome to the pyramids and all this kind of stuff now.
It's all changed.
Yeah, but it's amazing what they've done in that country. My hat's really off to them. They have really done a great job. I don't know where I was going, but
It's okay.
what I was saying, but anyway.
Well, you were talking about the finger of God.
Oh, yeah. I personally believe that when they threw their rods down, when they imitated, there's a big question in that whole thing. Were they pulling off tricks?
Right.
We've all heard that if you press a cobra on the back of his neck in a certain way, it becomes stiff like a rock. They threw it down and it became, started with. I honestly think it was demonic deception. I think they were tapped into the demonic world.
Seems likely.
And Satan gave them enough power to do one or two things, but he runs out of power at some point.
Yes. Well, you talked yesterday about how he's defanged. I think
Yep.
that's a good
Yep.
illustration of that.
Yeah.
He can't ultimately compete with God's power. I guess we could talk about that for a second because you said that at the end. Oh yeah, I was going to talk to you about Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. We'll get to that in a second. We're going to need
I
at least
knew that would register.
we're going to need at least 40 minutes to get to that. But the way that Satan. Oh, did Joanna have something?
The magicians were not able to cure the waters or disperse the frogs.
Yeah. See, they
frogs.
could produce that, but they could not get rid of all of it. The same thing like with the water. They could make it happen, but they could not stop it from happening.
That's just an important element of spiritual warfare. Is that ultimately Satan has plenty of parlor tricks,
Yeah.
and he can scare the fire out of you
Yeah,
but ultimately he's tricking you because he does not have the power.
It's all
to touch
deception.
you.
Yeah.
It is all deception. So okay. I don't think we're going to have time for Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. Maybe we'll do that as a chaser at the end because I really wanted to talk to you about this. This was the most interesting thing to me because
You know what? I thought nobody really responded, and I thought
this image
that
is
was
so
pretty
small.
fascinating to me.
Well,
This is the cemetery there on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem.
So that's again. This is where the context of a biblical event, the geographical location of a biblical event, where it gives a completely different understanding to the text.
Yeah.
Because for years I've been reading that Palm Sunday text. I've even read it a couple times this year because we've done that new song, "Christ Be Magnified." And so there is truth to the idea that like all creation praises the Lord. Like though creation itself does not have a consciousness, just by its very existence, it has obeyed the word of the Lord.
Yeah.
So it praises him by its existence. But you are saying that when Jesus says, if my disciples don't say anything, even these rocks will cry out, he's not talking about just rocks laying by the side of the road. He's talking about these burial stones, and he's referring to the resurrection.
Well,
That's amazing.
I think you can see that in it. Maybe he is talking about the rocks that are just by the stone. But it's so funny that right off to his left, and they would have been, I don't know if it looked like this. A lot of them were buried in caves, but they had stones rolled up in front of them.
Yeah.
Like, the tomb of
But
Christ.
people knew this was a
But
burial ground.
they'd known that since the first temple period, which was the day of Solomon, and there's indication that they were buried there before that. I just did not run it down far enough, but it was a cemetery in the first, because they believed when Messiah came, it would be the resurrection, and they wanted to be right here where he would stand, because they knew Messiah would come to Zion, but would stand on the Mount of Olives. You can read Zechariah about that anyway.
Yeah.
But that understanding was already there. And I just thought to myself, isn't it interesting that there were tombs here when Jesus came down? Because the road down is just on the other side of this cemetery. That if Jesus didn't just gesture and say, these stones will rise up.
Yes. Well, and
And-
then you took us rightly to Matthew 27.
27, which is a fascinating
I know
passage.
people don't talk about like the zombies that just come
Yeah,
out of
yeah.
the ground.
Well, they are, Matthew
It's also
27.
It's strange because and I've had to read this passage several times because we use it on Good Friday every year. But it's interesting the way that Matthew kind of tells it out of order, because he tells it at the crucifixion.
Well, he does. The veil of the temple was torn. Jesus
Right.
dies. The veil of the temple was torn. The tombs were open. Many of the bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. It sounds like to me that this is just progressive, that it's happening from that time through the resurrection Sunday.
Oh, okay.
Because it says, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection. Well, maybe the tombs were opened, but they did not come out until after the resurrection.
So, okay.
And I think that's part of what is being shown here, is that this is what happens at the resurrection of Christ, is that the dead will be raised.
Well, that's
And they became a witness. Now, how freaky was that?
extremely freaky, because it also doesn't say like when did they die again.
Yeah.
Like how long did they walk around?
That's
for?
all you have is that right
Was
there.
it until the ascension? Like, did they then go? Did they just okay? See you guys. Christ is ascended, so we're just going to go.
Well,
chill back
these
in
were
our
not
chairs.
resurrected, I don't believe. I believe they were simply resuscitated. It was after his resurrection that they came out.
Right.
Not after their resurrection, but his resurrection, they came out of the tomb. Well, you just stop and think about that. Well, good old Uncle, Pretzel Bender died last week. And boy, he loved the Lord. And he loved that Jesus. He loved, and all of a sudden, here comes Uncle Pretzel Bender through the door.
Yeah. Right.
What's going on? What are you doing up out the
He
tomb?
came back just to have his name finally legally changed. Pretzel
so,
Bender. It was
whatever.
too much, you guys. I'm back. I'm going to sign the paperwork, then go back to sleep. That is fascinating to me. I mean, obviously, that's something that really would have got people's attention. I mean, you talked about that. That was what I know. Well, you talked about that's what people brought. That's what brought such a large crowd to Christ there as he came into Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Obviously, it's a large crowd because of the Passover, which a lot of people kind of skip over that. They're like, oh, they're all coming to see Jesus. Well, first and foremost, they were coming to make the pilgrimage because it's Passover.
Yeah.
But they come and see Christ. Why? Well, not necessarily even because of him. It's because Lazarus is chilling with him, and Lazarus has just come back to life.
Yeah,
which
he
is
was
not,
raised from the dead.
It's not something you see every day.
No. The large crowd of the Jews then learned that he was there. That's Jesus. And they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus. It's like, well, Charlton Heston is here, so we're going to go see Charlton Heston. Hey, but Tom Cruise is with him.
No doubt.
So we're really, we're not going to see him. We're going to get to see.
Got to decide between the NRA and the Scientology there.
Yeah.
I think the other thing with Lazarus is I can't help but wonder is if he were alive today, would he be getting a book deal? Would he not have written one of those My First 30 Minutes in Heaven kind of things?
Even a reality show.
A reality show about Lazarus. Yeah, here's the tomb, and that's where I died. And
Do you know that from Lazarus to the son of Nain to Jairus' daughter to the kid that fell out of the window,
Paul,
when Paul was preaching and was resuscitated, none of them ever say anything in Scripture. You never have a word from any of them.
Oh, that's interesting.
Except for the little girl who says, no, she doesn't even say that. Jesus says, give her something to eat.
Yes. So, but Lazarus doesn't say anything either? He didn't say
No,
anything
you never have
afterwards?
a word from Lazarus, man.
My good friend Jim Lanley always talks about how like Lazarus says he comes out of the tomb, but he's like, well, and if he's in his burial wrappings, he probably had to hop out of the tomb,
Yeah.
Which is a funny image.
There was a movie or a book on Lazarus, and all he did was laugh.
Yeah.
All he
It
did
just
was
so
laugh.
happened-
It's
I know which one
the
you're
it's the
talking about.
story, and I can't remember if it's a book or a movie. But every time you see Lazarus in the scene, he's just
He
laughing.
was just so happy to be alive.
I think he's just laughing, saying, "You have no idea.
Yeah.
You have no idea."
Right. Of course, and I guess I should have put it in here, but of course, the story of Lazarus gave Carmen one of the inspiration for one of the greatest Christian music songs of all time, if not just the greatest song of all. You know which one?
Carmen is so wild. No, tell me the one I don't know.
You don't know which one I'm talking. Oh man, I'll show. Well, it'll take me too long to pull it up now. But y'all, any friends of the show that are watching right now, do yourself a favor, and please YouTube Carmen, Carman, Carmen Lazarus, and just watch him do like basically an '80s Elvis impersonation.
Yeah.
With just the fans just screaming and fawning over him, and man, it's beautiful. God rest his soul. Carmen died a couple years ago,
Man,
still in his prime.
I think one of the best things I've ever seen was when he was like the cowboy. You know,
Yeah,
and you hear the
he did
theme
them
song
all.
from Bonanza behind
Yes,
it.
I'm still not sure Carmen died or if he was just taken up into heaven in chariots of fire. What a guy! Chariots of Fire. I showed my kids that scene from Chariots of Fire. The other
Hey,
night.
listen, the Olympics are going to be in Paris.
That right, and that was. Did you know what number Olympics that was?
No?
Eric Little in the Olympics of the eighth Olympiad, the games of
Wow.
the eighth Olympiad. So that was like. It was like World War II era, I think,
Yeah.
wasn't it? It was the 1940
Somewhere around
or
in there,
something like
yeah.
that. Anyway, so I showed that to the kids, and it was one of those moments where
Oh, and Paris is really, they're working fast and furious. We were there for a couple of days.
oh, that's right, you were there on the way.
They
cool.
were, then they're building, they're doing, I think what they're doing is they are doing these venues in front of these famous places.
Oh, of course.
Like they're
of
going to
course.
do something in front of the Eiffel Tower,
got
something in
to.
front of the tomb of Napoleon, something in front of, all of these.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, I'm
I
sure.
think the venues are going to be there.
I wonder if the marathon route like goes under the arch. That would be.
I
kinda
bet.
Cool.
I don't know. I didn't get up to the arch. I was off in different directions.
It's so busy. I remember going there. It's
Oh, my
it's
word,
so
yes.
you're like, oh wow, look at this nice tourist spot. Well, it's like it's a roundabout. It's like a 6-lane roundabout. It's huge.
It
There's
is.
cars constantly going around it. So, but I'm sure they'll shut it down and do something with the marathon. I think it's going to be interesting seeing the way that they cover the games this year. I love the Olympics. The way that they cover it is always interesting depending on the time change.
Mm-hmm.
So this year, I don't know what they're going to do because the way that social media is taken over, everybody's going to know absolutely everything
Yeah.
before
Before it happens.
before you watch it
Yeah,
in prime
yeah.
time. So, but preview for should the Lord tarry, we get the Olympic Games in 2028.
Do we? Where are they going to be?
Los Angeles, out there in LA.
Oh,
Should the Lord tarry. Finally returning the Olympics to its place of origin, the United States of America. So grateful. We're finally hosting the Olympics. We've won the Olympics for at least, 15 times in a row, Jared, that we've won the Olympics?
18.
All the countries say that you can't, that say you can't win the Olympics they only say that because it's sour grapes, because they've never won the Olympics before, right, Pastor?
I guess so. If you say it,
I didn't realize I felt so
I believe my
passionately about
monster
this.
of music.
Yes, I do. I am a monster today. Well, we got some monstrous music coming up this week. We've got Good Friday, which falls on a Friday this year.
Yeah.
And then
It's
Easter.
very different than the Passover this year, though. It all has to do with the moon.
Yeah, the lunar calendar.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got in a bit of a shouting match in choir this past week talking about that. Just because I was sad how the spring break, the public school calendar,
Yeah.
spring break overlaps with Holy Week.
Yeah.
Everybody's out of town, that sort of thing. But apparently it's Easter's fault, because Easter's the thing that moves. Spring break is always constant.
Yeah.
It's the
Well,
moon's
you know,
fault.
they always do Easter the first Sunday after the
First full.
first full moon. However, Passover, comes almost a month later.
Yeah. Well, and that's what. So, yeah, and as I've said before, got some in-laws that are Orthodox, and their Easter is May 5th this year.
Wow.
So talk about a difference. Usually it's just a 1 week difference. Very rarely it's actually on the same day, but this year it's a full 5 weeks later. 5 Sundays
Good
later
night.
is their Easter.
Yeah.
So they're just having to wait a little bit longer for the resurrection. I guess, has their Lenten season even begun? Do the Orthodox even call it Lent?
I don't know.
These questions and more answered on the next episode of the sermon recap, which, well, I guess will be in like 2 weeks' time because we're not in the office next Monday.
No. Are we not?
Well, it's not currently. I think Pastor Jeff usually closes it.
I will still be.
You're still going to come
I
in?
still will be working.
Oh, okay.
Somewhere.
Somewhere. Maybe we'll do one of those fun call-in kind of things. I feel like we covered a lot of good ground today.
Yeah.
We talked
and
about.
never got to the word.
I thought we did. We talked about all the.
Oh,
this
yeah,
was-
yeah, we
you know,
did.
this
We
is
talked about that. That's
so,
right.
Do you want? Well,
And you see the wall up here? See, there was the
Yeah,
gate
that's the
that I was
western
talking
wall.
about. Yeah, yeah. No, this isn't the western
Eastern.
wall. Yeah.
East.
the-
I'm
yes.
sorry. Eastern. Yeah, he comes.
Faces
The
the
morning
east.
star comes to the east. Yeah. Sorry about that. I blew it.
Say goodbye, Kirkwood.
Goodbye, Kirkwood. We'll do more Bible for y'all next next week.
I'm so excited, even I knew that was the Easter. 'Cause
the
what's
Easter.
so-
I just am saying,
Is it
I
super
just said
windy
it
every
wrong.
time y'all go to the Mount Olive?
Is it not? Yes, it always
So
is.
crazy.
It's always windy.
I'm sorry that picture was so blurry. We didn't talk about the crocodile.
Oh,
God.
the crocodile god.
I had that in there too. That is just amazing how much
Maybe
work.
more
It is stunning to just walk up. You see what these are? These are all baboons.
Those are other intricate carvings up there.
Yeah, baboons. They're all baboons, and I forget why they put back, because they say that baboons were a symbol of wisdom.
That's funny.
Isn't it though? This guy really thought highly of himself. Very powerful guy. Powerful. Pharaoh, Ramses II. That's the one that a lot of people will always say was the Pharaoh of the Exodus, but it's almost certain that he was not.
Which one do you think was the Pharaoh? of the
Probably Tutmos III,
Exodus? Okay. And that was later than.
earlier.
Oh, earlier. Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Because inside this place, there's an interesting thing. Inside this place, Ramses II goes up through Israel or up by the coast, going up that way to fight somebody. And there is an actual picture carved into the wall of what they are almost certain was the tabernacle.
Oh, really?
Yeah, showing the 3 parts of the tabernacle and the 3 doors getting into it and
Wow.
people out there, worshiping. So he probably rode by, saw the tabernacle. So it happened before Ramses II came to the throne, about 200 years or so before.
Now that is fascinating.
It is fascinating.
but that's also.
And there is a word, Kirkwood, there is a word up there written in something. In fact, I've got a picture of it that they say is the only time you see the name Yahweh written down in Egypt. Now, I don't know because I don't read that mess, that stuff.
It's a hieroglyph.
No, it doesn't look, it looks almost Aramaic to me.
Oh, okay.
Let me get back here and I'll find it for you. I'll find both of those.
I find it so interesting.
Here it is. Here's the 3. Oh, come on. Oh, come on back. Where did I go with that? Here are the 3 gates. Here they are worshiping. Here are the 3.
Yeah.
They're the angels inside the Holy of Holies.
Wow.
Or on the curtain there, and here is the name. Now, I have no idea what that language is.
So why? Who? It was your guide that theorizes that that's Yahweh.
Yeah. He says that's the name of Yahweh right there. I guess it would be written this,
right to left.
this way, you know.
So he agrees with your assessment then, that it was Tutmosis. I think it's so interesting, like the Exodus ends with Israel having fully plundered the Egyptians.
Absolutely.
So it's fun. It's interesting to me that they were able to recover to that point, where Ramses has like risen to such power and wealth.
Well, they had several things like that. That's one of them. But several times in their own history, they have some pharaohs that absolutely deplete everything. And you know, where do they go back to get more gold, more silver? How do they replenish? A lot of it comes from other countries that were paying them ransom, you know. So, and different things, various things, various places. They believe, and I found this to be pretty fascinating, they believe that that the ones who plundered so many of these tombs were the priests themselves.
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
So, preachers. All right, have a good day.
Yeah, I'll see you in all.